Hi chess fans, in this video we will look at um, the last resort longside defense. If you're a pawn down in an endgame where your opponent has a rook and a pawn and you only have a rook, there is a number of defensive resources in this position, and this is just a quick recap before we get to the position of this video. In this position, black defends with the Philidor defense. So the pawn is still on the 5th rank and the rook is staying on the 6th rank until white moves the pawn forward. Then the rook drops back and gives endless checks from the back. Okay, that's the Philidor position. If we cannot reach this position, then it depends if the white pawn is a rook pawn or knight pawn, or a bishop pawn or central pawn. In the case of a knight pawn, like in this position, as you can see, we cannot reach the Philidor position anymore because the rook cannot reach the 6th rank in this particular position. But here we have an alternative defensive method, which is the passive defense. The rook just stays on the 8th rank, and there's no way for white to make progress. And in the case of a bishop or central pawn, we have the so-called active defense. The passive defense does not work. The active defense simply means we let the king walk to one side, the short side, then move the rook to the long side, and then either stop the pawn with the king and the rook like this, or to stop the pawn from advancing by giving side checks with the rook from the side here. And if the Philidor doesn't work, and the active defense doesn't work, and the passive defense doesn't work, we still have the last resort long side defense. So in this position here, the black king is not able to occupy the square in front of the pawn anymore. The pawn is advanced, but fortunately we have our rook here controlling the 8th rank, and you also notice that the king is on the short side and the rook is on the long side. So again, if Philidor doesn't work and active or passive defense doesn't work, we can only draw if we can get the rook to the long side and the long side defense works. So let's have a look at how the long side defense works. In short, the long side defense means that the rook is blocking access of the king to the 8th rank, and the king can also not move to this side because the king is blocking the black king is blocking the white king away. And if, for example, king d6, we can actually move the black king in front of the pawn, which allows us to transition into the active defense. So white can really only try to move the king forward and try to block this rook away from here. But the rook can give side checks. And this is black's only chance to defend. Because if, for example, the black rook went to the a1 square, white can reach a Philidor type position and will win. The only other option other than giving the check is to prevent the white king from going to e8 with attacking the pawn on e6. But I think it's the most clear way is to think the rook stays on the 8th rank, denying the king access together with the black king, and then gives side checks. Okay, so in this position, white can again try to block this rook, but then the rook just goes back. If white tries now to move the king to e8, the problem with this is that the black king can step forward and attack the pawn. And if rook d7, we drop back to the 8th rank and draw. If in this position white tries king d6, we just continue giving side checks. This is the essence of the long side defense. We just give side checks, and if the rook moves in between, we drop back to the 8th rank, and white didn't make any progress. And in often cases, when the king moves away too much, we can actually bring the king in front of the pawn, which is the ideal defensive position. Okay, so after this attempt to block the rook away from the 8th rank, and the side check and blocking the side check with the rook going back, white can also attempt d6. And d6 is a little bit of an evil move because white attempts to bring black in a sort of Zugzwang position. And the problem is the following. This rook is in an ideal position here because it blocks access of the white king to the back rank. So, for example, if in this position here black would move to a1, the white king can now access the 8th rank. And if black now tries to go back and check, the rook can block and white wins. So in this position here, after the evil move rook d6, this rook cannot move to any of these squares because it would allow king e8. Okay. On the other hand, and this also holds true for this check, because then white can move king e8 and wins in a similar way. On the other hand, the rook also has to stay on this file. So, for example, if the rook moves to b1, then black loses the distant effectiveness. So what that means is, if white now plays rook d8, black has to transition to the strategy again to give checks, as we have seen in the position before, where in this position, if white plays d8, black has to give side checks. And this is the strategy in this position. But if after rook d6, the rook moves to b8, and then white plays rook d8, and black has to give side checks to stay in the game. After rook d7, rook b8, now white can play rook a7, and suddenly the rooks have reversed places. And we will look a little bit later why this is losing for black, but for now, remember, the rook has to be on the long side and has to have at least 3 files between the white king, and now the rook has only 2 files and loses its distant effectiveness. We're going to look at this a little bit later, but for now, let's note that after rook d6, this rook here cannot really move, because on any of these squares it loses its distance effectiveness, and on any of these squares it allows the king to go to e8. So it's really only the black king that can move, and this black king, if it moves to b8, white has the resource of the double attack on king and rook, and white will win because the pawn just moves forward. So the only really move that black has is king to g6. So after rook d6, you have to remember the rook has to stay here in the ideal position. The king cannot move here, so the only move is king to g6. And don't remember this particular move, but remember the ideas. If the rook steps to any of these squares on the 8th rank, it loses its distant effectiveness. And if the rook moves to any of the squares on the a file, it allows king e8. Therefore, the king has to move, and the king cannot move down here because of double attack, so the king has to move up. Okay. And now, white can only play rook d7 to make progress, or to to make any move. And then the king just moves back and we are back to the starting position. And if the rook in this position, I mean, we looked at the number, we looked at king d6, which allows king f8. If the rook moves to c7 or to b7, excuse me, if the rook moves to c7 with the idea of the king stepping aside and then moving the pawn forward, the king just circles, stays on the g file, goes back and forth between those two squares. And after king d6, after king d7, after the king steps aside, the black king steps closer, with the idea that if white now advances the pawn, we control the square in front of the pawn and the position is drawn. Because again, the rook is in an ideal defensive position here, and if the rook steps aside to the side, the king can come close and stop, similar to the active defense. Okay, I hope this was not too much information in too quick a time, but remember, if you cannot reach the Philidor defense, and in the case of a bishop or central pawn, you cannot reach the active defense, or in the case of a knight or rook pawn, the passive defense, then your only chance is to have a rook that is at least 3 files away from the king, your king to be close to the side, and the rook controlling the 8th rank, so that whenever this pawn advances, either your king can step close and control this square together with the rook, or this rook can give side checks to the king as a defensive strategy. Okay, we had looked at what happens if the rook loses its distant effectiveness. So let's recap. After rook d6, rook b8, and this trick, black has lost it. White has tricked the rook away from the a file, and we had said that the black rook is now too close to the king. And so let's have a little bit closer look at this position. So again, we're going to look at this position with white to move, even, because white wins either way. But in a nutshell, what we're going to learn is that this rook is now not positioned ideally. And as one part of the white plan, black was depending on the strategy of giving side checks. And exactly this part of this defense breaks down at the moment that the rook is only 2 files away from the king. Okay, so let's have a look what that means. So first of all, in this position, white to move, white has to transfer the move back to black. In fact, let's quickly have a look at this position. With black to move, just to show how the distant effectiveness is impaired and how the strategy breaks down. Okay, in this position, black to move, the king has to move to g6. Remember, if king g8, white can play king f6 and cut off the black king. And reach a cut off the black king like this, and then reach a Lucena type of position, or even the king is cut off and white wins. So the king moves up, and now white attempts to cut off the king again, and after rook b7 check, Well, in this position, the only defensive mechanism that black has is to give side checks. And after king d6, king b6, the black rook is too close. And that's the problem of the distance effectiveness. If the rook was here, then white could not approach the rook without losing the pawn. But because the rook is on the b file and only 2 files away, white can move away from the checks and get so close to the rook that the rook cannot move here. The rook would love to be on this square and move up here, with the result that it would attack the pawn behind the king. But because the rook is here on the b file, it does not have this option. And for example, after rook b8, king c7, black simply loses, because white will now be able to move the pawn forward. The rook has to move, so for example, if the rook drops back, white can now simply move the pawn forward. Okay, so let's drop back to the beginning. White to move also wins, and the mechanism is that white wants to transfer the right to move back to black, and white can do that by playing king d6, threatening to play e7, and the black king has to step close, so that after, for example, e7, black would draw like this. But in this position here, white can play king d7, and the only thing that black can do is move back to g7, and the king has to stay close, and now king to e7, and now black is to move. Okay, and we have seen that after king g6, the rook attempts to cut back the king. Black has to give this checks, and this doesn't work. Black could try other things here. For example, black could try to drop the rook back, but this gives up the problem of this is that it gives up the 8th rank. So white happily now takes this position. And remember, in the beginning we have said the black rook wants to be here because this is the ideal defensive position for the black rook. But now the white rook occupies the space, with the result that white now controls the back rank. And after rook b7 check, the rook again is too far away. White simply wins. Okay. So let's try to recap. This is the ideal defensive position for black. Philidor doesn't work, active defense doesn't work, passive defense doesn't work anymore, and the black rook has occupied the long side with 3 files distance to the white king, and the black king stands ready to step close and control the square. And this combined, these two combined resources are the defensive resource that that black needs to draw. And in the case that the rook is on the b file, there's only 2 files distance between the rook and the king, and the way for white to exploit that is to play is to transfer the move to black, and then black has to move the king up, which allows white the possibility to drop the rook back and attack the king from the back and cut it off. And the distant checks are the only defensive resource that black would have, but they don't work because the rook is too close. Okay, of all the positions that the stronger side has one pawn against rook and rook, this is maybe the most difficult position. So if you couldn't follow all of the variations, just put the position on the board and play around a little bit with the engine to understand the intricacies of this position. But in the end, remember, long side checks combined with the king stepping close is the essence of this defensive resource, and the stronger side should try to to minimize or eliminate these advantages, and we've seen that in this position here, Rook d6 is a really cool attempt because the only move that draws is King g6, and Black has to know this position to find this move. Okay, thanks a lot for watching. If you like those videos, don't forget to click subscribe so YouTube sends you an update once a new video is available. Thanks a lot.